Good afternoon. On behalf of the Brazil Center at LLILAS, it's my pleasure to welcome you today to a talk by Professor Marta Mendes da Rocha. She's an associate professor in the Department of Social Sciences at the Federal University of Juiz, Fora in Brazil, where she coordinates the study group on local politics. She holds a PhD in political science from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. And over the last decade, her studies have looked at political institutions, political representation, subnational governments, local politics, clientelism, and brokers. Her current research focuses on clientelism and brokers in Brazil's local politics. She investigates how brokers' background, resources, and links with people, political parties, and civil associations shape their relationships with politicians and voters. And we were fortunate to have Marta as a Fulbright visiting scholar at LLILAS during spring 22. So please join me in welcoming back Professor Marta Mendes da Rocha.
Thank you very much, Seth and Paloma. I'm very happy and very honored to be here. Well, as I just said, I had prepared a presentation, but unfortunately at the last time, I don't know what happened, but I had some problems with the file. So unfortunately, I will not be able to share with you this presentation. So I will speak slowly, and I hope I will make myself clear our main argument here. This article I'm going to talk about is one of the results of this research on brokers. It's a research on brokers in local politics in Brazil. And this particular piece was written with Lucas Gelape. I'm grateful to Lucas for the partnership. I don't know if he's watching. And the title is Political Affairs, Brokerage Relationships Between State Representatives and Local Politicians in Brazil. We had discussed and presented some other versions of this article, and this version I'm going to present, we had incorporated some comments, some suggestions, and I'd like to start. Well, our start point here in this article is a well-known fact about Brazilian politics, the fact that politicians at different levels cooperate to achieve electoral and governing goals. And here we are talking about legislators, state and national legislators, deputados estaduais and deputados federais, as we call them in Brazil, and local politicians, mayors and councilors. They build alliances. It can be formal or informal alliances during electoral campaigns or beyond elections. And through these partnerships, they work together, seeking for mutual benefits. And as I said, it's a well-known fact about Brazilian politics. And most recently, these alliances, these multi-level connections, they started to be analyzed through the theories of brokers, theories on brokers, theories developed in comparative politics. And the general idea here is that representatives, these state or national representatives, they serve and they allocate resources to municipalities, and in exchange, local brokers channel votes for the legislators. So it's this kind of exchange, flow of resources from upper levels to municipalities, and flow of votes from municipalities to these upper levels. And so considering this, having this start point, we have main questions here in this article. First, how are these relationships between state representatives and local brokers, how are they built, maintained, and eventually broken? And we'd like to know to what extent these theories on brokers, they are suitable, they are a good framework to describe, to analyze, to understand these relationships. So this is the two main questions we address here. This is an exploratory study. We didn't do a systematic test of a hypothesis here. Instead, we are trying to generate new hypotheses. and maybe to point out some theoretical and empirical pathways for this field of research. And as our main contributions, first, we are focusing on state representatives, and they are usually neglected in this field in Brazil. Brazilian political scientists usually focus on national politics, national representatives. So we are turning our attention towards these state representatives, deputados estaduais. Besides, we are interested in the mechanisms underlying these relationships. And we can see that generally this literature, it's based on a set of assumptions or on the observable outcomes of the alliances, but they don't go further into these mechanisms, and this is what we are trying to do here. And finally, we draw attention to a different variety of brokers, elective office holders, local politicians, those who works at politicians at the local level. And this is important because usually the literature, I think I can say that the most part of studies don't make difference. They don't distinguish brokers, local politicians who play this role of brokers, and another types of brokers. For example, communitarian leaders or religious leaders, or people who doesn't have an ambition in institutional politics. So, and we claim that we need to distinguish these two kinds of brokers, because we believe that the dynamics of this relationship is quite different depending on your focus. Our analysis combines data from survey with state representatives from 12 states in Brazil, and qualitative evidence that more specifically data from in-depth and open-ended interviews with advisors, with people who work as chief of staff or advisors for state legislators. So we combine these two kinds of data, and in a few minutes I will give you more detail related to the research design. But I think that for those who are not familiar with Brazilian political systems or the way the elections work in Brazil, I think there are 2 or 3 facts that are important in order to understand the context of these connections, or of these multi-level connections. First, well, we have 3 levels of government, three autonomous levels of government in Brazil, with direct elections, and municipal elections are separated from elections at the other levels. So this is very important to explain and to understand this alliance between politicians at different levels. So mayors and councilors are elected, and 2 years later, state representatives and national representatives, they are elected. And they are all elected in the same district, because for both of them, the electoral district are the states. And besides, another important fact, it has to do with the way how the Constitution, the 1988 Constitution, increased the importance of municipalities and local politicians in Brazil, especially mayors, because the Constitution assured municipalities important resources, political authority, fiscal resources, responsibilities in very important public policy areas. So this is a very important fact. But on the other hand, most Brazilian municipalities remain strongly dependent on financial transfers from upper levels, and they face infrastructure shortcomings. So this combination, this institutional design, in this combination of federative organization, the way we organize elections, the way the contour of our electoral districts, the way the fact that we have separated elections, plus this concentration of resources at the central level, all these creates incentives to this cooperation among state, national, and local politicians. Well, what kind of incentives? And this is what help us to understand their motivations. To mayors, these upward connections, they are symbol of power. They are a sign of their ability to bring resources, to channel benefits to their localities in the form of investments or investments in infrastructure or public works projects. And they are essential, consequently, they are essential to assure their electoral success. And in the case of national and state representatives, many of them depend on local politicians to get credit for the benefits delivered, or to build a good reputation in the locality and to nurture these links with the community, with the local community, and of course, consequently, to mobilize votes. And we have some evidence in the literature that citizens, that voters, to a good extent, they choose candidates for the national and for the state legislature with local councilors in mind. And they usually prefer those with a recognizability to allocate resources to their localities. This matters. This ability that matters for voters, and legislators know this, and mayors know this. So we have some evidence in literature in Brazil that this cooperation pays off for both parts, because for example, we have some studies that show that a victory in the mayoral election increases the party's electoral chance for state and national offices 2 years later. And if you have many mayors supporting you, this is good for a party. This is good for candidates for national and state positions. And the other way is true, because an alliance with legislators increases the electoral chance of mayors, especially in small towns, because they are the most dependent on this upper trend of this transference from the upper levels. Besides, we have some evidence in literature that political parties play an important role coordinating, articulating these multi-level alliances, these multi-level connections, because they try to maximize results in different electoral rounds, municipal elections, general elections, at different federative levels, local, state, and national. So there are some evidence that parties matters in building this alliance. Well, turning our attention now to this literature on brokers, because one of our goals here is to evaluate to what extent they are suitable, they are good framework to describe these connections. I think it's important to think about the definition, but who are these people, brokers? What are you talking about here? And of course, there are many definitions of brokers. We are talking here, we are working with a more broader definition, seeing brokers as people who mediate between politicians, parties, candidates on one side, and voters and groups of voters on the other side. And according to these two studies, they would be very important actors to structure and to maintain networks, sometimes clientelistic networks, and to mobilize voters. They would be important to solve community problems and to support government tasks at the local level. So they have a role, not just during electoral campaigns, but beyond the elections. Usually, this literature tends to analyze these relationships between bosses and brokers as a market transaction. The idea is that these relationships will last while it produce benefits for the for voters, for brokers, and for bosses. While it provides mutual benefits, it will last. And with very few exceptions, in political science at least, with very few exceptions, literature tends to disregard friendship or feelings of gratitude, reciprocity, obligation to explain, to understand how these alliances are built. So they tend to see them as market transactions. And besides, these principal agent theories or principal agent models, which are inspired by rational choice theory, they are important references to analyze these relationships between brokers and bosses in this recent comparative politics literature, because these models, they are usually used to describe situations in which one actor, that is called the principal, provides incentives for another actor, the agent, to make decisions and to act in behalf of the principal's goals and interests. So every time you have this kind of situation, this standard situation, you have to delegate, you need that another part in order to seek a goal and to achieve a goal. It's common that these principal agent theories or principal agent models are applied. And these models, they rely in two main assumptions. The first one is that there is a conflict of goals between principal and agent. In our case, it would be a conflict of goals between brokers and bosses. In this conflict, it presents risks for the bosses because they are not, they can't be sure that brokers will act in behalf of their interests. And a second assumption is that we would have a kind of informational asymmetry in favor of the agent. In our case here, in favor of the brokers. The idea is that the brokers have insider knowledge and information, and this is why bosses needs brokers, because they know better the community. They know voters' preferences, voters' needs. But the question is, they can use this information strategically in its own favor. Trying to maximize their own interests. So it's like bosses here, they face a kind of dilemma or series of dilemma because they depend on brokers, they need brokers, but they cannot trust them entirely. So they need some mechanisms of real rewards or punishments for creating or enforcing relationships, in order to prevent, for example, opportunistic behavior, predatory behavior, because there is always the risk that the broker will keep part of the resources that should be distributed to the other part, in this case, to voters. The idea here is that brokers, they offer a solution, but at the same time they point a problem, because they point a problem for bosses. And then going back to our problem, to our two questions, through our research, we try to it's not as I said, it's not a systematic test of hypothesis, but we try to address these models in see to what extent they are suitable and they are a good framework to describe this relationship and to understand the way these alliances are built, the way the parts nurture these connections, and to understand the breakups, because they happen frequently. So we used a multi-method approach. We combine quantitative and qualitative descriptive evidence. In the quantitative part, we use data from 2 waves of a survey with state legislators from 12 Brazilian states. It's not a representative sample, but it allows us to identify broader trends in these relationships between state legislators and their brokers. And in the qualitative part, we used data from in-depth interviews with advisors, with chief of staff. We chose to focus on them instead of the legislators, because we believe that they would be more accessible, and they would have a more broader vision or view of the actions and process we were interested in, and they do in fact. So this qualitative evidence allows us to apprehend their perceptions, their motivations, and to offer a more detailed description of how they make choices, how they act, how they react in their mutual relations. So going to our main findings, what we'd like to highlight here? Well, first, local politicians, mayors, councilors, they do play the role of brokers. They are an important source of support for some legislators. And they are mayors, especially mayors, they are kind of gatekeepers. And I'm going to read for you one quote for one of our interviewed. He said, I don't remember if it was he or she, but he said, let's suppose that you are the mayor of a municipality, then I go there alone and ask for a vote. Nobody knows me. People from the countryside trust the mayors, the councilors, the leaders who talk about the legislators. So this idea that a legislator needs a mayor because it's like the mayors are those who open the doors of a municipality and talk about the legislators and help them to claim the credit for the things they do, the benefits they deliver. And it was really interesting for us realize that they use a very interesting expression to talk about these activities concerning all these relationship with mayors, councilors, listening to their requests or fulfilling their demands, or trying to explain to them when they can't fulfill them entirely. They call this trabalho político in Portuguese, what we translated by political affairs. And it's interesting because for us, everything they do is political, but they do these distinction, and it's very frequent. It was common in many different offices. The fact they do this distinction between what they see as a more technical activities, for example, lawmaking, the committee, the activities related to committees, or even to concerning public policy, for example, in health or education, and what they call trabalho político. And they see it's interesting because I think it shed light on the way they understand politics in some way, and seeing politics as these activities concerning negotiation and dealing with another politicians, dealing with communitarian leaders, and so this is what they call political affairs, trabalho político. And another very interesting finding for us, especially because literature really doesn't draw much attention to councilors. So it was very interesting for us to realize that councilors are very important for legislators. They were very clear about the importance of councilors, especially in those municipalities where the legislator can't count on mayors, especially on those municipalities where the legislator doesn't have the support of the mayor. It's very important to have the support, the councilor support, because it's a way of nurturing the relationship and the links with the community, and also is a way to work in favor of winning or recovering the main prize, that is the local executive. There is no doubt that mayors are more important. They are because of their authority, because of the constitutional constraints, and but councilors are important too, and it was very interesting to realize that. And they most value financial resources, budget amendments, and what we call in political science pork barrel, to the expression we usually use to designate this activity, these efforts to channel to municipalities budget resources. But they value a lot the assistance that the legislators' offices offer in solving problems with state agencies, because state legislators, as well as national legislators, but here our focus is on the state legislators, they have more access to these state agencies, they have more information, their offices are more prepared to deal with these legal requirements, all these bureaucratic questions, compared to mayors, and compared to, especially in very small towns. So this is very important, and it's something similar to what to which in the United States they called constituent service, but it's not exactly the same. But there are something in common in these activities here. And we saw that the councilors' requests to legislators are more diversified than those of the mayors, because mayors, for the most part, they ask for financial resources. They are interested in financial resources, so they can invest in public works and in infrastructure. We observe that legislators' actions are predominantly reactive. Sometimes they take initiative in this relationship with local politicians, but our evidence showed us that for the most part, they are trying to fulfill the mayors' and councilors' requests, and this is the primary way they nurture these alliances. And these partnerships are built primarily through friendship and geographical proximity. And reputation is very important, because both parts, they seek information about the reliability of potential alliance. Before deciding who they are going to align with or who they are going to support, they seek information about people. And so that's why reputation is really important here. And different from we can see in literature on these multi-level connections in Brazil, we concluded that political parties are not an important criteria for structuring these alliances. They can matter in some occasions, in some settings, but it's not the rule. It was very interesting to see that our interviews, they didn't even mention the parties during the interviews. And I'm going to the conclusion now. But a last thing among these findings we consider the most interesting is another very important fact, the fact that state representative, because although these alliances can be very decisive in electoral terms, they are very uncertain. They are very risky. They are far from guaranteed. The electoral return is far from guaranteed. And legislators are well aware of it. It's very interesting, but they are not willing to punish their partners. If these partners didn't deliver what they were expecting, for example, if they didn't deliver the amount of votes they promised, we can't see this willingness for punishing their partnerships when things go wrong. And so now, trying to summarize what we consider our main conclusions here. As I said, as we expected, local politicians are important as brokers. They do play the role of brokers. They are a very important source of support for state legislators, not for all of them. We are not claiming, we're not arguing that there is a general pattern here. But for many of them, they are very important. But we saw that they do not occupy static positions in this relationship. They are not locked in a single role, because the role they will perform depends on the moment. And so we are claiming in this article that they have a kind of dual role. They play a dual role here. And those who on a certain moment are the bosses can become the brokers. At municipal elections, during municipal elections, for example, state legislators, they work for assure that their brokers will keep their office. So state legislators act as brokers for local politicians, as well as local politicians works as brokers for them. So they are not locked in a single role or position in this relationship. That's why we claim that these principal agent models, they are not suitable, or they present some limitations to describe these relationships, because they suppose a very rigid division of work in these situations, in these relationships. That's not what we saw here. We conclude that it's really dynamic in this sense, that they change roles depending on the moment, depending on what is at stake. And I think it's also important to say that not all legislators, because we focused on legislators with geographically concentrated voting, because according to literature, these legislators are the most they are those who most value this kind of support from municipalities. They are those who we call in Portuguese as municipalistas, deputado municipalistas, because they care for this kind of support from municipalities, from local politicians. It's linked with these to these geographically concentrated voting, this specific special pattern of voting. So we have to consider that not all legislators are dependent on local brokers to assure local support. And we saw evidence that some legislators in their office, they make an intense use of social media in a kind of attempt to publicize the legislators' actions, what we could see as a credit claiming strategy that suggests a deliberate effort to downplay the role of local politicians as mediators. Because if I can talk direct to my voters, with my constituency, I don't need to nurture this alliance. I don't need to devote time, energy, resources to mayors or councilors, because I can talk direct with voters. I can nurture these alliances without mediation. So it was very interesting to see this. It was an exception among our interviews, but it's there. And finally, I think it's important to clear up about the scope of our conclusions, because since we are not working with a representative sample, we cannot make inference from this data, from this evidence for the whole set of legislators or for the whole municipalities in Brazil. But it's important to think about the relevance of our findings, of our conclusions to other countries, other settings. And we believe that they are relevant to think about these multi-level connections in settings with, in decentralized countries, because they are usually in these decentralized countries, municipalities have more political authority, they are more important in the whole political system because of their responsibilities. And these are the settings where mayors are more important to as a political actor. Besides, in settings, in countries in which municipal elections are held separately from elections for the other levels, because we believe that this is an important condition to the kind of dynamic we see here. And finally, we believe that our findings are also relevant for thinking about these connections, this alliance in settings with a poorly institutionalized party system. Because in these settings, other elements can be more critical, more important in articulating these multi-level alliances, differently from countries where you have this kind of machine politics parties and almost everything goes through parties. So it's different from what we are talking about here. So that's it. These are the main findings, the main conclusions. I thought it worth it to highlight, and I hope I could make myself clear. And again, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Seth, and thank you, Paloma. And of course, I will be happy to answer questions and to hear suggestions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for that really illuminating talk. And I wanted to encourage the audience, please, to post questions and we can convey them to Marta so that we can hear more about her research. I thought I could start off the conversation. There were so many interesting pieces of information and insights that you provided. I found myself thinking of questions and then you would answer them, as you continue, as you progress with your talk. But I wanted to ask you about the question of scale in the municipality, because I know you said you didn't claim to have a model for all of Brazil and that you're focused on certain municipalities, but I wondered within that if you see like how your model might differ from, let's say, Belo Horizonte to like a very small municipality in rural Minas Gerais, and how those dynamics are similar or different based on the nature of the society, the economy, and the demographic. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. It's a great question. And we address this question in our conclusions, because this is one of the things we are arguing, that we cannot make general inference when we are talking about municipalities and in Brazil, and when we are analyzing these alliances, because we have many difference in social, economic, demographic difference, and we need to consider the context. We need to, so if there is informational asymmetry, if there is a conflict of goals, everything we believe that will depend on the context, including the way the political parties are structured, the electoral competition, the level of dependence on the municipality, for example. And I believe that the aspect of the scale, it matters undoubtedly, and especially because we believe that the balance of power between these actors will be completely different. If we are talking about a relationship or alliance between it, I'm not sure if I'm talking all the time about alliances, but it's important to clear up that it can be a very informal way of working together. So, and of course, if we are talking about legislator working together with mayors from very small towns, we believe that the relationship will be very different if we are talking about state capitals, because the level in which these mayors will be dependent on extra resources, and I say financial resources that came from these budget amendments. So the way they will nurture this alliance and the nature of the requests, because we are talking about a different environment. The nature of the problems, the nature of the requests, they are different. So you're right, and I think that the next step for us is to try to understand and to explore some of this difference, including between states too, because we have some states with, I don't know, 100, 200 municipalities, or Minas Gerais, 800. And we have other states in Brazil with a few number of municipalities. So this problem probably matters too.
And I was also intrigued by your comment, and you said that that the brokers are not punished if they don't deliver the votes. And the first thing I thought of was, well, that wouldn't be the case with like Trump and the Republican Party, so that would be very different, right? So my question for you is, to what do you attribute the relative leniency or flexibility in how the power brokers deal with underlings that don't deliver the votes, that don't serve them, basically?
Well, we have some data that allows us to speculate, or more than speculate, because we try to understand this, and we talked about this with them, because we usually think that this kind of relationship, that it depends on some kind of rewards or punishments for their work. So but the question is, they revealed more comprehensive. So when we ask them, why are you still working with these mayors if they didn't deliver, if they didn't deliver as expected? Don't you consider that is a kind of betrayal? Or even with when they change sides and they say, well, they do what they can do, what is in their they consider their possibilities. They consider that, for example, in the last minute during an election, for example, a political party change an agreement, and there is nothing that mayor can do about it. So they reviewed extremely comprehensive about the many variables that interfere to the ability, the mayor's ability to deliver. And they understand that, of course, and another important thing, they are not entirely able to monitor their behavior. It takes time. They need to devote energy, to devote staff for it. They try to do it, but we concluded that they are not entirely able to do it and to differentiate between a hardworking mayor, a very loyal labor. So they use some shortcuts. And one of the shortcuts our data suggests us that is friendship. If they have a long-term relationship, if there is a friendship relationship and a long-term relationship, if it's someone that worked with me for a long period of time, we had done many things together in a certain region. So it's a kind of, we call this a kind of reserva de confiança. And it's very important to renew this trustfulness.
We have a question from the audience from Breno Pacheco Leandro. He says, hi, Marta, my name is Breno Pacheco. I'm a PhD student at UFPR. Would like to know if and which variables related to parties or distribution of resources were collected during the study?
Yeah, none, because it wasn't, well, actually we used quantitative data and qualitative data. In the qualitative part, we interviewed advisors from advisors working for legislators from different parties. So we had in our sample legislators from parties that we usually label here in Brazil as left, as right, as center. And in the quantitative part, in the survey, we did some analysis considering political party as a variable, but we didn't find anything really relevant or important. That's why I didn't mention here, or I didn't highlight it. And regarding distribution of resources, no, we didn't include this kind of data in this specific study. But I agree that it's important in some way, and it's important to combine these different kinds of evidence, but not in this article.
When you were here in Austin, I know we talked a little about coronelismo and how you sought to distinguish your work from some of the older scholarships. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how your work dialogues with that older scholarship, and also, I guess, popular perceptions of party politics and boss rule and coronelismo, and how your more contemporary research maybe updates that or challenges those models.
Well, I think that there are a kind of consensus in Brazilian, among Brazilian scholars, social scientists, that coronelismo is a very located concept. We don't use it anymore to refer to nowadays politics, and because I think there are this consensus that it was something related to the first 3 decades of the 20th century, but clientelism, no, clientelism is different. It's a concept very important in the Brazilian political thought. I think that the citizens' perceptions, and we can see it in the media, and we are talking in some way about clientelism. And so it's more present. I think it's not, and I think it's not just in Brazil, in Latin America. I think it's an important key to understand political and social relations in Latin America, and it's not different in Brazil. And well, this article is one of the results of research on brokers and clientelism. And what I'm trying to do in my recent studies is to dialogue with this recent literature on clientelism, because I think they rely on many untested assumptions, and I think they usually mobilize. And of course, it's not always clear. It's not always something that scholars, that authors say loudly in their articles, in their books. But I think there are a kind of ideal model or a general idea about how democracy works and or how democracy should work. And I think there is this kind of movement when you compare or you put against the model, the real politics, you put against these models, and every displacement or every how can I say, problem you identified in the workings of democracy, many of them this literature attribute to clientelism or see as kind of inheritance or of this clientelism. I'm trying to challenge in some way these ideas, and trying I'm trying to offer maybe a different perspective, seeing for me much of this literature calls clientelism is politics as usual, and not just politics as usual. I think is real politics, in the sense that this kind of alliances we're talking about here, these kinds of connections in politics, they are very common. It's not just in developing countries. Connections, networks, this is everything in politics. And of course, they will assume, they will take different forms depending on the context, but they are always present. I think they will always be, if you have asymmetries, if you have a different access to authority, to resources. So I think it's just politics, it's just real politics. But of course, that it's usually seen as a problem. It's usually seen as something that we need to abolish, we need to get rid of, because and I think that there is a kind of negative evaluation of this kind of behavior and among the media, but even among the academics. And I think that it's because we are usually working with these models, with these ideal models. And I don't know if I answered your question, but it goes for this direction, trying to challenge some assumptions that I see, that untested assumptions, that something that we need to investigate empirically and to rethink and to examine more, to go further and examine it deeper.
Yeah, I think we've just got time for maybe one more question or so. So, let's see if the audience, someone from the audience wishes to pose. If not, I'll go and ask a question in the meantime. But I would encourage the audience as well to pose an additional question if they'd like to. Yeah, I guess I would just ask you, what aspect of your findings did you find most surprising, perhaps? After embarking on this research, what most surprised you about some of the findings that you came across after doing this research that you didn't expect?
Well, I think first, I think when we started this research, we weren't aware of this difference between local politicians who act as brokers, who play the role of brokers, and another kind of brokers. Because if you go to the most influential studies on brokers and on clientelism, distributive politics, they really don't make this they don't distinguish these two kinds of brokers. They are not aware of, I don't know if they are not aware of it, or they are not interested in make this distinction. And for us, it appeared as a very important thing, because I believe that we have many other material to analyze, and I believe we have many important difference. When we look at the relationship between state legislators and religious leaders at the local level, or communitarian leaders, or people who, as I said, who don't have ambitions in institutional politics, or even activists, party activists, or people you hired to work in a single election, you cannot treat them at the same way. A mayor who works as a broker, and a broker you hired to work in a single election, but with whom you have no time, or you are not interested in nurture any tie or any bond. So this one of the main findings for us. And I think it helps us to better understand the way federalism works in Brazil. I think it helps us to understand the way politics works in Brazil. I'm not saying that of course, it's not the whole story. I'm not saying that the whole politics goes like this, but I think this is an important part. This is a very important issue right now in the country, because of the kind of relationship the president are keeping, are nurturing with national representatives, with deputados federais right now. And there are many analyses that points that the president probably are counting on these mediation dynamics in order to get votes in the next election, through these financial transfers that it goes through national representatives to mayors and to voters. And of course, they are all very important in order to establish the credit and to dispute this credit. So I think it calls attention to a very important aspect of Brazilian politics. Of course, we need to study more, to research more, to think more on our data. And well, but this is one of the aspects I think is important to highlight.
Thank you. We have one last question. It's from the audience, from Camila Miranda. Congratulations, Professora Marta. Excellent explanation. I would like to ask a question. In your opinion, does the fact that elections are mandatory in Brazil reinforce the role of brokers?
No, I don't think so, because we have many studies on brokers in countries where votes are not mandatory, as in the US, and they are equally important. They can be equally important for getting people to the polls. No, I don't think so. I think maybe it's different when we see the strategy, if they are working for mobilizing voters, or if they are working for getting people to vote. It can be different. If it's a persuasion strategy, or if it's just a matter of sure that they will vote. So I think that it can be different, the kind of strategy they use, but no, I think they can be equally important in both settings.
Well, unfortunately, we need to bring this event to a close. I wanted to thank Paloma Diaz for her assistance with this broadcast, and of course, to Marta for such an interesting presentation. It was a pleasure to hear more about your research, and I wish all of you a good afternoon, and boa tarde, everybody.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Paloma. Thank you all.